Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow. And on today's episode, we're looking at two of the biggest rumours on the market right now. Arsenal want Nico Williams, but can they get someone better for the same money? While Zubimendi is a hot name too, but could Premier League clubs do better for a €60 million outlay? Then we're going to profile two players who we think could be decisive in their respective leagues over the back half of the season. That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow. So we're back for a transfer player special, and who better to have on than Neel, who is, I think, intimately acquainted with literally every person currently playing football at every level worldwide. Like, I joke about this, Neel, but like, you have opinions on leagues that I have forgotten exist, which is like genuinely amazing.
Hopefully in today's episode we won't talk about those leagues too much, otherwise I think our audience might not enjoy it. But thank you very much, Ryan. Of course, glad to be back, and looking forward to this discussion.
Well, look, you say thank you, but we've brought you back on during an international break, so it's always a little bit thin on the ground. But we're seeing transfer stuff spool up. We talked about this a little bit on Monday. There's the Trent Alexander-Arnold news that has been firmed up midweek, and so we wanted to talk about two players who we think you should be watching over the coming weeks and who could be really decisive for their team's ambitions. And then we want to look at these transfer rumors. There are these players who we hear about for months and months and months. Both these guys were rumored targets for big teams last summer. And it feels sometimes like we get target lock, and it feels like, you either get that guy or nobody at all, and it would be a disaster. But that's rarely the case. There are always other options. So we're going to run the rule over some of those today. But should we start with player to watch? Because you've got somebody who actually straddles the divide between these two, right? He is both a really important player for his team as we get into the business end of the season, and we expect to be a huge name in the summer transfer window.
Yeah, absolutely. And that player, of course, is Dejan Huijsen. As you say, going to be absolutely key for Bournemouth in this business end of the season. You and Ted were talking on Monday about how they have this outside shot at the top 5 spot, even though they're currently far away in the table. If you take a close look at them, they do have a good shot. And of course, they're also in the FA Cup still. They have a big match coming up this weekend against Manchester City. If they win that, I believe they'll reach a cup semi-final for the first time in their history, or at least as far back as I could find. And of course, he'll have a big battle there with Erling Haaland, you'd expect. So that's going to be a huge test for him. That's why I thought it's a good idea to pick him out. So a bit of background about him. He was born in Amsterdam, but his youth career started in Spain. And of course, with his international career, he started off playing for the Netherlands, but ultimately committed to Spain at the senior level. And of course, in this break, he had a match for Spain against the Netherlands. So I think that also tied in well.
Mm-hmm.
So he was, he started off somewhere else, but he was at Malaga's youth academy after he turned about 10 or so. And then when he turned 16, there were a lot of big clubs looking at him. I read reports that Real Madrid were looking at him. But ultimately, it was Juventus who signed him. He moved over to Italy, and he kind of rose through their ranks, through the under-17, into the next-gen team who play in Serie G, and obviously are a relatively recent kind of addition to their structure, and have been doing a lot of interesting stuff with this kind of recruitment. They have a lot of these players, especially from around Europe, young talents they're bringing into the next-gen team and developing well, really. I think you have to credit them for that bit at least. They've used the team quite well, but what happens then is a separate matter. And I think we saw that very much with Huijsen, because he made a grand total of one senior appearance for Juventus before he was loaned off to Roma in January 2024. He was again very highly rated there. I think Jose Mourinho was the head coach at the time, and he, like, even when he had played like one or two games, he was like, this guy's a top prospect. Of course, then I think he was sacked, and then they had De Rossi, and so it was obviously not the most stable period in Roma. But I think Huijsen definitely gave a good account of himself whenever he did play. Obviously, went back to Juve in the summer, and they decided to sell him for all of 15 million euros, which does not look like it was a bad decision then. I think everyone could tell that's not good. but it looks increasingly worse day by day now because, his value is somewhere like 3 or 4 times that. And I guess that's a good sort of a viewpoint into the issues Juve are having, because obviously the one news item of this international break was Juventus sacking Thiago Motta and replacing him with Igor Tudor, and of course then there is discussion about, does this actually solve their problems? And Kim wrote a great newsletter yesterday looking at exactly what's going wrong with Juve.
Yeah.
So I would obviously encourage you to read that, but hint, it's not the head coach. There's clearly bigger issues, and you can see that with Huijsen's transfer, because last I checked they were playing Lloyd Kelly at centre back. I would argue, which is also a funny parallel because he obviously went there from Bournemouth.
Sure.
It's funny, but I would argue Huijsen's already a better player than Lloyd Kelly, let alone in even a couple of years.
That Bremer injury, this is exactly the situation that promising teenage centre backs are kind of for. But they did with Juventus. It feels like last summer they were like, right, well, we need whatever money we can get in, with this and very low deal for Chiesa in order to make all these moves that then they're locked into, right? A load of those fees have got to be paid this summer. So Gonzalez, for example, I think they owe nearly 30 million euros still on that.
Yeah, they love their loans with obligations to buy in Italy.
But then it means, but then you can but then with the Motta situation, you're like, well, if Motta isn't getting much out of this team, and we probably don't have a lot of latitude to change this team in the summer, what do we do? Like, no wonder, right, that we're in Vlahovic season again, where every single year suddenly we start hearing stories about how everybody would like to buy Vlahovic for like 60 mil, and you think this is a Juventus fantasy that somebody would spend this money on him so they can do anything this summer.
More loans with obligations to buy for
exactly. More loans on loans.
But coming back to Huijsen, of course, he's, like I said, just 19 years old. So, very much got time and potential to develop even further. And he's clearly had an exceptional season with Bournemouth, who are themselves doing so well. And so naturally, he's being linked with all the top clubs. You see, obviously, all the names thrown around. But the likes of, I've heard Liverpool, I've heard Real Madrid, all those names in some reports. Obviously Chelsea as well, because, if there's a teenager doing well anywhere in the world, Chelsea are going to be linked. But I think we should first, focus on what he's like as a player. When you watch him, the first thing that very clearly stands out is his on-ball ability, right? He is just exceptionally composed and a very good passer with both feet. Like, it took me a while to understand, is he left-footed? Is he right-footed? I think he's left-footed, but he's really, really good with it's the equivalent of the Dembele situation for centre-backs.
Sure.
Obviously he also plays on the left side. When we assess, especially Huijsen, where he's only had, I would say, like one really representative senior season, because like I said, with Roma, there was all sorts going on. So now when you look at his stats and numbers, you always have to apply, or even when you watch him, you always have to apply like the team style context, right? So one thing I've noticed with Huijsen and his passing is generally you either get like the simple circulation, so, across the other centre back, up to the full back, or you tend to get a lot of like switches and long balls. You don't get a lot of those mid-range progressive passes between the lines.
Sure.
When he's playing for Bournemouth. Is that because he can't do it? I don't think so. And we've seen him do that kind of stuff for Spain or at the youth levels before as well. I think it's more for a case of, the tactics at Bournemouth are geared to play a certain sort of way, wherein they kind of circulate deep, wait the opponent to press, and then often go long, look to attack in transition. And so he's playing more of those longer balls, those switches, passes in behind, which are obviously also very good skills to have. But I would say, like, when it comes to passing, he's pretty much shown everything you could really want to see. He's so good at like creating the sort of passing angles with also like quick carries. So he's not someone who's going to like run up the field with the ball, like Joel Matip used to do for Liverpool sometimes.
Sure.
But he'll make those slight runs, just sort of pull up the opposition forwards around a bit, and then he'll sort of access the gaps with often like very precise and also well weighted passing. I think that's another thing that stands out, is the weight of his passing is always tends to be quite good and quite accurate. You don't see him overhit or underhit too many balls. So yeah, I think exceptional on the ball clearly,
which is unusual as well at his age, right? You know, like that's one of those abilities that does improve with age.
Yeah.
And so for him to be doing this as a teenager in a tough league is pretty remarkable. It's one of those things like you know, sometimes aerial wins and things like that as well, right? Yeah. You know, like knowing how to use your body, or maybe just your pure upper body strength. These are areas where he's very unusual in shining at such a young age, whereas we might expect him to be making a load of defensive actions, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, with these young centre backs, often what you look for or what you see is a great physical profile or sort of signs of a great physical profile. So, you know, someone who's covering ground really well, someone who's, you know, looking obviously very tall, which he is, and things like that. And then you go, okay, now this guy, he can clearly develop into someone who's, you know, exceptionally strong in deals and strong in the back. We can work on his passing and make him, you know, an elite level centre back. So, you know, if a team like Real Madrid looking at him, they'll say, okay, he has these qualities. We can, you know, develop this, and then he'll be right for us. But with Huijsen, it's sure. Almost as if he already has those passing qualities, those on-ball qualities. And as you said, even like defensively, I think I've been impressed by just how generally like solid he is with his anticipation, with his use of his body for duels, and even his like decisions in duels. So, you know, whether to jump for an aerial duel or just to like kind of hold off and try and throw the attacker off, and then, you know, maybe just a second ball or whatever. He's been very impressive in that sense. And obviously, again, you apply team style context. So if you look at his defensive actions numbers, they're quite high. And that, again, leads a bit into how Bournemouth defend. They often sort of step up and press. And so he's kind of backing the press, jumping up. So obviously, those things are also factors. But I mean, just from Bournemouth's point of view, he's obviously been an exceptional signing because he pretty much perfectly does everything they want him to do, both in and out of possession, whether it's his kind of passing abilities or his defensive quality and intensity. And if you're, you know, another big team looking to sign him, I think, as you said, there's already so much quality that he's showing that he's kind of a much more sure bet, right? Like, I mean, always when you're signing teenagers, you are like, okay, we need him to develop in this sense. But then if that doesn't work out, then you probably don't have the level of player you're looking for. But Huijsen's already like very close to that level. Like, I think you could put him in one of the top teams today. He wouldn't look out of place.
Yeah, there's I know what you mean. If he never develops at all, he'll still be a good centre back.
Really good. Yeah.
Which is kind of nice. And then you think, okay, well, this guy is maybe 5 years pre-peak as a centre back, but it's also interesting that this style, you know, as you said, having to jump up to follow the press, is probably not something that he did have to do at youth level. Like maybe in the international setup, there you'd expect him to have to do it, right, with Spain. But it's not going to be something that he's necessarily been trained in at Roma under Mourinho or in the Primavera at Juventus. So to be doing this in his first full season as a starter in an extremely physically tough league and in a new system to him is genuinely remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very important to stress as well, like just the physical demands of the Premier League, right? And how tough it is for a centre back of his, because I mean, a big reason we don't see, especially young centre backs coming through in the Premier League, we see, you know, more of them in like Liga or, you know, Serie A, even La Liga, is just because of how physically demanding it is, both in terms of the amount of ground you have to cover when your team looks to press and you have to run back, but also increasingly this season, even just the amount of directness you'll face from your opposition, you know, that forward swarming you from all sides, big strikers, really strong strikers. So it's not at all an easy place to make your sort of first full senior season. But yeah, I mean, he's done super well. And in fact, yeah, I did see some sort of like discussions online about, because his aerial like dual win rate isn't exceptional. I think it was like around 60 odd percent.
I think it is 60%, I think.
So, which is, well, obviously not bad, but some people have raised concerns that, okay, he's not like an aerially dominant centre back. And as we said, the Premier League is increasingly going in a direction where you need these kind of dominant players. But I mean, I would say to that I think obviously you can't just look at the dual numbers and say whether he's aerially dominant or not. Because as I was saying earlier, I think he is a bit more measured in when he tries to jump and contest, like properly contest the duel and go for the header, versus when he's just kind of trying to throw off the attacker and get back. But on the whole, I think obviously one, he's very tall, which is key to be good in the air.
Enormous.
And two, he's showing the sort of good understanding and decision making in his duels. So I think with time he can surely even improve those numbers. But I wouldn't even call it a weakness right now. Like I don't think you can just chuck long balls at Huijsen and get much going there. So yeah, I don't think that's really a concern. And honestly, I can't think of any, like this is the crazy part. I can't think of any big concerns when you're signing him. He's kind of giving you almost whatever you need. So yeah, I think it's he's obviously very much one to watch in the last couple of months of the season.
Yeah, it's not even like he's protected. We do see that quite often with centre backs, where or coming from a weak league. Like you think about De Ligt when he was very, very young. He was coming from a league where it would allow him to burst forward, and he had a bit more free time to pass, I would say. But yeah, we're playing in a pressing system. The other thing is that I think has gone a little bit under the radar is that he's been quite a big threat as well. He's actually got more expected goals and assists per 90 this season than Gabriel at Arsenal.
Yeah.
I think he's got something like 3 expected goals and assists put together, which is not huge, but if he ends the season with kind of 4.5, 5, if you can get 4 or 5 goal involvements out of a centre back a year, then that is completely free money. And especially because, as you say, it feels like there's a little bit of room for him to improve aerially. What I'd really like to ask you is, what is the best team that you think he could be a starter for now? So if he were to move this summer, do you think he could go and start for anyone? Or do you think if he went to Real Madrid, for example, they'd say,
they would take him right now. They would take him right now.
They would take him right now, sure. But do you think he'd just start for anybody?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he'd necessarily start for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, again, if Liverpool keep Van Dijk, I don't think he starts ahead of him yet, probably. I mean, again, experience, all that, obviously also a factor. But yeah, like he could start for close to anyone. And wherever he goes, I think he will surely be a nail. I mean, at the rate he's going, he will surely be a nailed-on starter in a season or two. Yeah. So even if Liverpool keep Van Dijk, I think there is value in going for Huijsen. Obviously, you can rotate a bit, and then Van Dijk will leave at some point, and that's when obviously Huijsen can shine. And I mean, again, he's only played on the left in his senior career, so there is probably some question if you want to move him to the right, how well that translates, because we haven't seen him there. But I mean, it's probably worth a try. And so if you can get like a Van Dijk Huijsen partnership, that's also a possibility. And he can also rotate with Konate then. So yeah, I think pretty much again with Real Madrid, obviously it's just a question of injuries as well, because I think they would also back Rudiger ahead of him.
Yeah.
Sure. But well, they gotta have fit centre backs for them to have that choice. So yeah, but I think I guess if the question is who should sign him, I would say pretty much anyone really. I mean, Manchester City, because they just signed 3 really young centre backs just this January. I'm not sure if it's a very smart idea for them to sign him. But if they do sign him, I think he can also add value to their squad in some ways. Obviously, assuming they also get rid of some centre backs and don't have 10 guys running around there. Yeah. I mean, I would already say he's at a level where he can sort of do well for basically any team, and that's the thing with his versatility as well, right? It's not like we have some questions about how well does he fit this style versus this style. So yeah, with all of that in mind, I think everyone's gonna be in for him this summer, and then I guess it's just a question of who's probably willing to pay the most.
I'm really excited to see where he ends up, and I do still think that it is really underrated by the football community at large how unusual it is to see a teenage centre back who is just a guaranteed starter for a side who are at worst the fourth or fifth best Premier League team this season. I mean that is incredibly unusual. It's something, a few years ago you only really saw it in Ligue 1, and now it's still quite rare in the Premier League. But this does feel like a bit of a sea change, and I don't know. I mean, it's terrifying to imagine what he could be like, and it's also terrifying to imagine what Spain could be like with him and Cubarsi side by side. I'm actually going to talk about a centre back as well, and I'm actually going to talk about Pau Cubarsi's partner at Barcelona, because I think he's been overlooked quite a bit this season. This is Iñigo Martinez. So he got injured just before the international break. He didn't go away due to a swollen knee, and they were like, we'll assess this, but it looks like it was just swelling and it would probably go down. And there wasn't that much attention on that, or at least that I saw. And I thought, I think this would be a pretty big loss if he's unavailable for the back half of the season, not just because there are people like, Eric Garcia behind him in the pecking order at Barcelona, who I extremely do not enjoy.
Well, he's fun, to be fair. Like Eric Garcia, guaranteed entertainment.
Yeah, that is undeniably true. Yeah, it's like I think Rishi, our producer, who actually supports Barcelona, probably enjoys Garcia less than the neutral. But yeah, like Garcia, he is box office. But it's understandable the focus is all on Cubarsi because even younger than Huijsen, he's so young. He's an incredible passer. He's playing for a super elite team this season. He has looked from his first game in the Barcelona first team like he was born to be in the Barcelona first team. And Martinez is 33 and more of a plodder. Like he's been around all over the place, right? Like he's not exciting. He's not a new toy. He was at Athletic Club for a long, long time. He was at Sociedad for a long, long time. He spent his whole life in the north of Spain, if you want to call it the north of Spain. I'm sure people will send angry messages about that. But he's been the 8th most used player in the squad this season. Like he's a regular. And when you look at his passing numbers, they're right up there with Cubarsi. So if we're going to praise Cubarsi for his incredible passing, and we definitely should, and again, he's super young, I do think we have to praise Martinez as well. This is a guy who's on the ball constantly. It's like over 80 passes a game, super high accuracy, including on long balls. And he's actually leading the team in final third entries. He's just ahead of Pedri. And he's second in progressive passes to Pedri. But to be right there with the best young passing central midfielder in the world is kind of astonishing. And of course, having a left footer too, so valuable for them. But Barcelona are able to pin teams in this season. They pin you in and they break you down. They could also play amazing counter-attacking football. But it's obviously not just the quality of their attackers and not just the defensive work rate of their attackers, but the smarts of this back line. Do you know how many times they've caught opponents offside in the league this season?
1 million.
Yeah, approximately 1 million. 145 times, which is top in Europe's top 5 leagues. Do you know who's second on the list?
Good question. In Europe's top 5 leagues.
You're the only person who I could imagine potentially getting this right.
Okay, so this is not a Premier League team. Who plays a mad high line? It's not a Serie A team. It's well, I'm running out of names, but I'm gonna go. Wow, completely blanking. No, it can't be Strasbourg, can it?
No, I'm afraid it's not. I'm afraid it's Parma.
Oh, that's very interesting.
It is interesting, right?
That was not a name which crossed my mind, to be honest.
I know, but Parma are second. They've got 93 offsides this season, and they're about 15 ahead of third place. So there's a pretty decent gap from third place to Parma, and then the gap from Parma to first place, Barcelona have 1.5 times the offsides of Parma. That is insane, and to be doing that while having a good defense, they're right there with Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid for XG conceded. That requires very smart defenders. It requires very smart defenders, and playing this high line is very difficult. I understand that it's tempting when we watch some of the Champions League games, for example, the Bayern game, to think, why doesn't everyone do this? And then you're like, because most of the time it looks like getting absolutely destroyed. You look like kind of peak Andre Villas-Boas, just getting annihilated constantly. And Martinez and Cubarsi just have this incredible relationship between them. And the actual defending is also good. Martinez, none of these Barcelona guys are ever going to win the ball that much. They have too much of the ball to win the ball that much. But and plus the attackers are crazy this season for ball winning. But he's winning possession more than Cubarsi. He's leading the squad in success for the tackles that he makes. He's at like 88% tackle success, which, look, that's going to wobble around a bit because he's not doing that much tackling. But when you play this high line, the tackles you do make are going to be important. So I just think it's really hard to have a knock on his game this season. He's also bringing the ball out of defense. He's the centre-back who does that. He does it 3 times as much as Cubarsi. He's top in the squad for aerial win percentage. All this kind of stuff. 3 goal involvements in the Champions League in like 700 minutes. 3 goal involvements in the league. That's a nice little chunk of change to get out of him too. I just think he's a guy who, when Barcelona signed him, I was kind of like, yeah, sure. Like, that sounds like something that they do. They want like a Spanish-speaking defender. Okay. Though I liked the player, but I had my doubts about him transitioning to this level. And not only has he transitioned to this level, but playing in a system which is incredibly demanding mentally on centre-backs, he has been absolutely outstanding. And I think having the benefit of him alongside such a young centre-back in Cubarsi really can't be overstated this season. It's so powerful for them. So I just think that at the end of the season, we'll be talking about Rafinha, we'll be talking about Yamal, we'll be talking about Pedri, we'll be talking about Cubarsi, maybe Casado. Like, all these guys are really exciting to talk about. And the guy who I don't think we'll be talking about is Iñigo Martínez. And I've just been so impressed by him. And it's nice as well sometimes to think, oh, I was super wrong about this guy. Like, this guy is not just like a squad player. He's an incredibly important part of a team which has a strong claim to having been the best side in Europe this season, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think he also represents, a really good signing from Barcelona, because they got him on a free last year when he was like 32, or I want to say 31, 32. And obviously Barcelona have done some very questionable stuff with their transfers,
Sure.
In recent years, but that's clearly an exception. And he's a kind of signing which I think, as you say, is very easy to underrate because he's an older guy. So, we talk about Huijsen, he's 19, we're so excited, he's going to be amazing. But Martinez is a kind of signing which teams do need to make sometimes, because I'm sure when Barcelona signed him, he probably wasn't meant to be signed to be a regular starter for like a whole season. I mean, injuries have also played a part. But one of the reasons I assume they signed him, as opposed to some other guy who's maybe like 24, 25, or, in the 20s, is because they knew they had Cubarsi coming through. So they probably thought, okay, so we got this really good young centre back. Let's get a guy who can do a job for us for a couple years.
Yeah.
And then we're pretty well sorted. And yeah, as you say, he's done a fantastic job. I mean, yeah, he's exceeded expectations for, I would say, everyone. He was already quite impressive at Athletic Club, both like on the ball, as you said, with those on-ball qualities, and also his intelligence. But yeah, I think I probably underrated the mental side of it, because when I saw like Barcelona's squad this season and Hansi Flick coming in, and I mean, we did expect some highlight madness, maybe not to this extent. I was like, okay, well, if they've got Martinez there, that could be a problem. He's not the fastest, right? He definitely isn't fast, like just running back. But yeah, he's been so good at just getting timing right. And I guess in a sense that also just further shows how good Cubarsi is, because like when you have this not very quick guy and then a 17-year-old and you're trying to play a high line, sometimes you can get the 17-year-old doing some silly stuff, just getting caught out of position a bit, or just making some bad decisions, which leads to actually the other guy looking bad because the ball went over his head. But they've done so well both together that we haven't really gotten too many of those situations. So yeah, I think it's very right to highlight him as a key player for Barca's season. And I would even say one of the reasons for me, I think Barca exceeded expectations to an extent, because I did feel that looking at their squad going into the season, like they would tail off in the second half when probably like some injuries hit them, and fixtures, just like the fixture load hit them, and injuries have hit them, especially in defense, right? But so just how well Martinez has played, it hasn't been a problem for them.
Yeah, so I mean, those are our players to watch. Like Huijsen, obviously in the running for a Champions League spot, for the FA Cup, and for a big move. Martinez, Barcelona top of La Liga, and have got a very good shot at the Champions League, I think we'd have to say. If there are other players who you think we could have mentioned here, who you expect to be really valuable over the last 10 games of the season, please do let us know in the comments. We'd really like to hear from you. So we're going to move on to our next section now. As I said, there are some names who just seem plastered to the back pages over the course of the season. And it's interesting to ask who teams could target instead. So we've picked, again, it's been a very Spanish episode, I've got to say. Who are you going to talk about, Neel? Because I think the guy that you want to discuss is linked to just about everybody.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss Martin Zubimendi. As you say, he's being linked to a bunch of teams, and unfortunately, only one of them can actually get him. So a bunch of the others are actually going to have to come up with an alternate option. I mean, they surely should have been doing it because everyone wanted him last summer as well. Ended up going nowhere, and a bunch of them ended up signing no one. Like, I mean, Liverpool were linked with him. They didn't sign a defensive midfielder. Arsenal were linked with him heavily. They didn't sign a defensive midfielder. Real Madrid were linked with him last. They're definitely linked with him now, and they also did not sign a defensive midfielder. So yeah, I think they should. They've had enough time to look at some alternatives. And one name I wanted to throw out there was Ederson of Atalanta. Now he's a different sort of profile. So I'm gonna focus on just like Arsenal and Liverpool and leave Real Madrid aside because I'm not too sure if he's probably the kind of guy they need. They need a different sort of guy. But I think there is a way for both Arsenal and Liverpool to make Ederson work instead of Zubimendi.
Okay.
And even I would even say there is an argument where you actually go for Ederson ahead of Zubimendi in certain circumstances. So let me explain. So let's just talk about Zubimendi quickly. So he's 26 years old. Reportedly, it's going to take about 60 million euros to sign him, whoever does that. And he's very much like a controlling kind of midfielder, right? Like he's an orchestrator. I mean, for Spain, it's obviously a very simple like comparison to make with Rodri, right? Like he's someone who sits there. He's very positionally disciplined. He's incredibly secure on the ball. He's excellent awareness of his surroundings, and sort of really good at just connecting stuff together, even if he's under pressure in the middle. So he'll play like first time passes forward, even without like necessarily looking because he's already scanned that area before. So he's sort of super secure controller who's going to sit in front of your centre backs and take care of business there. Now, Ederson is not that kind of guy because he plays for a team who do not do any of that business.
Sure.
So Atalanta don't care much about control. They just go and just run a lot. And Ederson certainly does that. Out of possession, he's very much a kind of a destroyer kind of guy. So whereas like Zubimendi is someone who sort of sit in defensive midfield and anticipate and intercept stuff coming his way, Ederson's just going to run at you and he's going to try and take the ball off you. So he's, but he, like, obviously he's quite strong in duels, strong in the tackle, uses his body well, both like in and out of possession, but to protect or win the ball. But he also does have like, I mean, again, this is difficult to assess with how Atalanta play, but I think he does have good enough positional discipline because you do need that to an extent with Atalanta. So, like when we think about positional discipline, the easy way to look at it is, all right, that guy's a defensive midfielder. If he dares step out of the defensive midfield area, he is undisciplined. And that's true for like a certain kind of team. But with Atalanta, the kind of discipline you're looking for is, okay, so the wide centre back's made a run forward, the wing back's gone forward. Now Ederson's come back and dropped into the wide centre back region. What's he gonna do now? Because like in the next possession sequence, Ederson might be the guy running forward. Does that mean he's undisciplined? No, that's just the kind of tactics and the instructions he's or the team has from the coach. But what I've seen of Ederson, I think he does kind of he understands the situations and positions himself accordingly well. So
Okay.
I don't think that's an issue. Now, he isn't the kind of certainly possession controller that Zubimendi is. He is more of a connector. And again, that's also how Atalanta play. So you'll see him go and create those wide triangles quite often and sort of quickly play the short link passes. And yeah, like I said, he can also carry through pressure or at least retain the ball a bit, but he's not like a big carrier, but obviously neither is Zubimendi.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's broadly what I'd say are the comparisons between the two guys. Like Zubimendi more of a controller, Ederson more of a destroyer and like a connector in possession.
So Edison's changed a little bit this season, right? So this season we've seen upticks in his pass into the penalty area, in his expected assists, and a little kind of downtick in his defensive actions.
Yeah.
Do you think that means that he could be, because when you're talking about him for Arsenal and Liverpool, for Liverpool we would expect him to be more of a conventional defensive midfielder, right? And for Arsenal, if he's a conventional defensive midfielder, it asks quite a lot of Declan Rice's final third passing. So what do you think about that?
That's exactly what I was coming to.
Okay.
I think that the question here for Arsenal and Liverpool to an extent is what sort of a midfielder are you actually looking for now? Because obviously you're looking for someone last summer, but things have changed since then. And like I think last summer still everyone was looking at Rodri and what he was doing for City and Spain. Oh, we need that kind of guy because we need someone to do that for us. But now this season, everyone's pretty much done what they're doing without that kind of a guy. And like Liverpool are doing fine. Arsenal at their best also do pretty fine. So then you ask, especially for Arsenal, do we actually need that kind of a deep controller? Because like, what are Arsenal's problems right now? If obviously forget injuries, but like when you have fully fit first team, where can you improve the side? Is it like, do you want to control games even more?
Yeah.
Mikel Arteta, what's going on? I mean, I think there's clearly a general consensus that, yeah, it would be good for them to get a bit more like, attacking injection sometimes, and yeah, sometimes like not just have to rely on Saka doing something, Odegaard doing something.
Sure.
Both of them going together to do something.
With Zubimendi, yeah, there's a part of it that feels like, well, are we hoping to buy here like mental qualities? Like, okay, don't get me wrong, there's some physical qualities too. So he's going to be more physically reliable than Jorginho at this stage of career. I think he's going to have better decision making than Thomas Partey. So in that sense, like the best of those two guys sounds great. But yeah, if you're doing more control, it feels like there are times this season where Arsenal want to go forward too quickly and they just get into the final third and get pinned in a corner and they don't really go anywhere. Then there are other times where it feels like they're just passing it around too deep and they don't have the sense for the transitional vertical moment. So I don't know, maybe the hope is, Zubimendi will have that sense, but just on the face of it, like watching him and looking at his stats, that's really hard. That's really hard to gauge whether he can bring that thing. I like, you're right. It does just feel like Arsenal just going to get better at deep possession. Great. more of this.
Amazing. Top entertainment for everyone. But I think the one scenario where I see Zubimendi as clearly the better option is if Arsenal are like 100% sure that they want to make Miles Lewis-Skelly a regular starter, because the kind of like forward injection he sort of offers from midfield does make up to an extent for his partner's like lack of injection. So if you're like, we're gonna invert Lewis Kelly and tell him to do whatever the hell he wants, then okay, it's good to have a guy like Zubimendi who's always going to be there, who's going to be disciplined, who's going to stay in his position, and kind of in certain cases, if Lewis Kelly loses the ball, help out and sort of fight the fires that might emerge. But if not, and obviously like Lewis Kelly is amazing, but he is also 18. And are you going to rely on another very young sort of academy graduate, or do you want to have more options? If it's the latter, then I think Ederson adds something where obviously he will probably be the deeper of the midfielder starting, but he can also push up he can also make things happen. And he can also support the kind of link play they've going on the right? Because we do have Saka and Ødegaard a lot. Sometimes you get Timber getting forward, but I mean, obviously he does make some good runs, sort of going inside. But you can sometimes just have those three on one side, and then nothing happening in the middle to kind of help them. But with Ederson, you actually get him coming in and offering a kind of outlet or like a way to re-angle the attack. And I mean, the other question with him is how does he fit with Ødegaard? Because Ødegaard also likes to drop in quite a bit. So do we kind of get those rotations where he also pushes up and Ødegaard like drops in to pick up the ball?
Sure.
That's something you might be able to see, or you're just having staying back. I mean, I think there are questions with Ederson, right? Because he's played in this crazy kind of system where, so like out of possession, all he does is like player marking because that's all Atalanta do. Now, how's he gonna do in a more like a zonal block? What's his rest defense gonna be like? How's he covering space there? These are questions, but I think for Arsenal, because they already have such a good setup there, like with the defenders, Saliba, Gabriel, even the fullbacks, I think like that's not a huge concern.
Sure.
And he gives you a kind of a different quality, which maybe can help this side. So yeah, I think obviously it does look like still, I mean, there's some new reports every day, but it still does seem that Zubimendi's probably going to go to Arsenal. So, which is, I mean, there's clearly scenarios where that does make sense. But if for whatever reason you don't get him, I think Ederson is a good guy to look at.
Yeah, I agree. And fractionally younger as well. Probably
by 1 year.
Yeah, and we'd assume fractionally cheaper.
Yeah, I think his transfer market value is like 50 odd million. And well, quite often you can't just go by transfer market value because, I mean, at the elite level, because I mean, most teams will ask for a premium. But I think with Atalanta, you can actually get somewhere around there at the moment. So, yeah, and even just quickly, even for Liverpool, I think he's an interesting one to look at because I do still feel that like Ryan Gravenberch obviously has done an amazing job, but I still think his best qualities are in a slightly more free role where he can also get forward at times. With Ederson, I think you get both of them being able to play because Ederson's not he's not a lone number 6, right? He's also someone who's gonna want to like push up. So with Gravenberch and Ederson, that's I think a very good double pivot to have, especially for big games because we have seen Liverpool. I mean, I think PSG is a very good example where you do feel, do they have just the defensive solidity and strength in midfield? Because yes, they have Gravenberch, but like who's his partner? It's Alexis McAllister, Curtis Jones, whoever it is. It's not someone you think is a good a particularly good deep defender or someone who's particularly strong in duels. There's someone who opponents can look to sort of get at to an extent. So if you have Ederson and Gravenberch, I'm not saying that's going to be a starting midfield for every single league game because surely like McAllister gives you more attacking qualities, more creativity. But there's definitely scenarios where, again, you can use Ederson and also possibly to free up Gravenberch. But I think there's more questions with Liverpool because like one of the issues you would say with Gravenberch are he's not amazing with his back to goal in the build-up, again, because he's not like a number 6. I think I would also have questions about Ederson in that sense. But like this season, I think Gravenberch has been masked that way because Liverpool haven't done too much short build-up because they always have the out ball, especially with Salah. So I guess that's also a question. Are they doing that still next season? Is Salah still there? So
with no Trent.
No Trent. Maybe no Salah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions there. But I think broadly, we can say, again, everyone's not going to get Zubimendi. If you want someone around the same age profile, slightly cheaper in terms of price, slightly different profile as well, but some overlapping qualities, I think Ederson is a guy you should be looking at.
Yeah, I think, and for Liverpool too, what you're saying there about receiving back to goal, that's an interesting point. But it does feel like a real defensive presence is something clearly missing from their set of midfield profiles. For Arsenal, something slightly different, some central creativity. But I think we could easily see both of these guys move this summer. We have seen Ederson linked to Liverpool before and to Manchester United, I think, as well, for kind of that 50 mil range.
Don't do it, man.
No, I don't want that to happen. But
I mean, for his career,
he'll get paid. He'll get paid at least. But yeah, I'd be really intrigued to see how these guys work in different kinds of sides, because they've been at their current teams doing a good job for a while. Plus, Ederson had that year, or was it just half a season at Salernitana?
A year at Salernitana, yeah.
Where he was different. He was quite dribbly, and it'd be interesting to see if any of that is still in there.
Yeah. It's I think he's less clear to get a handle on because he has that sort of versatility. As you said, even at Atalanta, his role has kind of evolved a bit, and obviously he was in Brazil before, so he's more of a, I guess, still a malleable guy, right? Because like we talked about, like with Arsenal, there's certain qualities they probably can use from him. With Liverpool, it's a slightly different set of qualities. So yeah, he's an interesting one, and obviously like the sort of basic. I would say like principal qualities of like defensive strength in duels, tackles, the defense midfield destroyer qualities are obviously valuable for pretty much any team. So yeah, I mean, you won't see him this weekend because he did something stupid in the last league.
Really
game.
Stupid, yeah.
But yeah, watch out for him whenever he's back next week.
Yeah. Okay. Well, last player that we're going to talk about today. I mean, we're in real Mikel Arteta mode today because we've done 4 Spanish players and 3 Basques. Because I'm going to talk about Nico Williams, but Nico Williams linked to Arsenal, linked to Barcelona. I'd say they're the principal teams that he's been linked to. Arsenal probably the strongest rumour right now, if only because they'd have the money to do it, and we don't know that Barcelona would. Given they've
some believers, don't you?
Well, they've only got 900 minutes or something out of Danny Olmo, who they pulled all these levers to get last summer. Nico Williams is a very interesting player because, of course, when these guys get talked about by the casual fan, there starts to become a separation between what people hope they will be and what they actually are. And Nico Williams, as this kind of like polished, finished article who will replace Gabriel Martinelli and not do any of the annoying stuff that Martinelli does, I think is perhaps a little bit misguided.
Guaranteed, I mean, 20 goal involvements. No questions asked.
Exactly. He's at 9 this season, same as Martinelli, and has played 2 more 90s, admittedly for, a more defensive side.
Close enough, actually, I'd say.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Plus, but also, he's the star guy. He's the guy. Like, if you're playing Athletic Club, then you're like, right, let's mark that guy. So he's facing a lot of traffic defensively. His expected goals and assists a little way behind Martin. He's at like 0.34. So this is not amazing. And they're very similar for progressive carrying, receptions, but Nico's the better passer. I mean, I think that's fair to say. And it's fairly clear that what you want here is more creativity from this side. The problem, of course, is that there's loads of stuff in Nico Williams' numbers that's really hard to separate from team effects. So he shoots a lot, but from bad locations, about half the shot quality of Martinelli. He also loses the ball an awful lot. He doesn't complete a lot of his dribbles because he's dribbling a lot. But he's matching Martinelli's expected assists. He's matching Martinelli's pass into the penalty area on a worse team. And I think the key thing here, and I do sometimes wonder if certainly coaches, but I think maybe Arteta, is shown a chart, where it has like people sort like an FB ref chart where they're sorted by one metric, and Mikel Arteta says, let's get that guy. Because when you look at the chances he creates off take-ons, he's creating over 1 shot off a take-on per 90 minutes, which is like triple Martinelli. And the next evolution of Arsenal has to be geared towards blowing up sitting defenses, right? They've now got a team with loads of space eaters. They're very hard to beat. They never get battered. What they do is have very boring games against teams they should beat, against deep blocks, against back fives very regularly. So I was looking at the players in Europe's top 5 leagues who are above Williams for shots created off take-ons this season. And you've got Jamie Gittins, number 1, then Vinicius Jr., then Kingsley Coman, and then Lamine Yamal. And then it's Nico Williams. And next on the list is Musiala. So that list does feel like quite a good indication of what we're looking for, right? It does sort of feel like you're in the right ballpark if that's the guy you're looking at and he's the gettable one. 50 mil buyout roughly, or 48, I think. 200k a week wages. The wages are a big thing. So over a 5-year deal, this would be like 20 mil a year. You get all his peak years, but it's an awful lot of money. So I do think you could look at someone a bit riskier. You could look at Ernest Nuama from Lyon. You could look at Alberto Molero from Las Palmas, though he's more of a come inside playmate type guy, I guess.
Yeah.
But if your aim is let's win trophies now and we're going to pay the money to get it done, I do think Antoine Semenyo is an interesting candidate for them. Because normally buying from Premier League team, more money than it's worth. But Williams is kind of costing Premier League money. Certainly he is on the wages. And Semenyo is playing in the league currently, is ahead of Nico Williams for expected goals and assists. He's at like 0.5. He's in line with Williams on progressive passing and carrying, though not so much on receptions, which makes sense because of the way they're playing. Expected assists, passes into the penalty area. He's the best of all these three players. And actually, while he's some way off Nico Williams on chances created off take-ons, he's still pretty high. He's still like double Martinelli's rate. Doing the most defending of these guys. He's completing his dribbles at a high rate. So this is a guy who's completing over 2 dribbles a game at like 50%. He's dispossessed about as much as these other two guys. Again, playing, well, I don't know.
He's arguably marked more than both of the others because, like, Bournemouth, like, as far as dribblers go, he's basically the guy. So,
yes.
And especially like when they're like counter-attacking or in transition, he's got 3 guys around him, but he still manages to find a way sometimes. So, yeah, I think dribbling-wise, yeah, that's a good shot.
And he gives other stuff, right, in the build-up because he's such an aerial presence.
Yeah.
He's shockingly good in the
air.
He wins duels, exactly. And the whole thing with Nico Williams as well, the whole selling point has been, we don't mind spending all this money because he can cover both flanks. Well, Semenyo is super two-footed. I was looking at this. He's taken 46% of his footed shots this season right-footed and 54% left-footed. So he is right down the middle. He's as ambipedal as they come, really. So this is a guy who I think, you don't necessarily want him to play on both flanks. You want to figure it out. But because of it, he is a little bit older. So maybe you get like 3 really good seasons and the last 2 are not as great. But given his size and given his two-footedness, it wouldn't be surprising if he could also spell you at centre forward for a little bit later on. And the adaptation doesn't feel like it would be too difficult for him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is in that 50 mil range. If you wanted to go and buy him, I wouldn't really expect him to be like vastly more expensive than Williams, unless I guess maybe if they sell Kerkez first and then you're going in for Semenyo, they say absolutely not, especially if Iraola goes. But he only just turned 25, and I do think that there's an interesting selection of abilities here, like that ambipedal quality, the heading quality, his threat off the dribble. I'm very excited about Semenyo, and when you're looking at the price that you're looking at for Nico Williams, you do sort of want to be totally guaranteed output, I feel. I mean, insofar as you can be. And don't get me wrong, Nico Williams is a great player already, and he's going to be better. And I think maybe you look at his Spanish performances as maybe more of an indication of what you might hope to get from him playing for Arsenal. But still, I mean, but international football, the pace of it and everything, it just feels like Semenyo is, if you want to play it very, very safe, he would be quite a safe option.
Yeah, that's a very interesting shout, I have to say. And like, I think one thing to note with Semenyo, so the age difference between him and Nico Williams is like 3 years. Plus Semenyo, I mean, if we put like age aside for a second and just look at minutes played based on the stuff Kim did with Salah for a newsletter I think a couple of weeks ago, like just minutes played, Semenyo has basically only had big minutes at Bristol City, because like before that, he was on loan at a bunch of places, but he was basically going on loan somewhere every season, and so he wasn't like a guaranteed starter from day one, right? Like he was obviously takes time to adapt and comes in and out of teams. So like even though he's 25, I haven't actually looked at his full career minutes, but I would say like for in general, because he's had an unusual path as well, right? Like he started off at like Bath City, so like he is 25 years old, but like in his legs, he's probably like 23-year-old kind of minutes. Again, this is just a number I made up, but that's a guess.
Yeah, but it's true, right?
And Williams, Nico Williams, obviously has been playing for a good while with Athletic Club. So, like, if you just look at minutes played, I would say they're probably somewhere similar. So, and with Semenyo, as you said, there is the option as well because of just how good he is aerially, of even converting him to a striker at some point if you need. And well, I mean, he'd do a better job than Merino, I dare say. So, you know, if Arsenal don't go and sign someone there, then yeah, Semenyo is a very interesting candidate. And yeah, there's definitely some spots where you can go and say, yeah, I mean, he's more of a sure bet.
Yeah.
So yeah, very
Nico coming in, that's the worry, right? That Nico Williams arrives and he's already in the red zone, having been there, having been playing, you know, incessantly for years. And maybe, look, I do think that potentially his family do just have superhuman genes, right? Like
we have reason to believe that.
Yeah. Like Iñaki's like steel tendons, you know, you can see that, but given the injuries that Arsenal have had this season and given the way that they've overplayed a bunch of their good guys, it doesn't feel... Look, you do still have Martinelli, so it's not like you're signing this guy and he has to play every single minute next season. But it doesn't necessarily seem the wisest thing from that perspective only.
And obviously with Nico Williams, I obviously not sure how much this is fully the truth, because I'm sure like money will talk at some point, but there is also an element of him wanting to stay to an extent at Athletic Club, obviously just because how that club is, but also Iñaki being there and various things. So as you say, like his wages are already super big, which are definitely a factor, and I would imagine that if you want to get him out of there, you might even have to give him more wages. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, are you gonna give him that much money in wages? Like that's yeah. With him, the big, because often when we talk about these young players, and especially like in you know every discussions, you just look at the transfer fee and you're like, is he worth 70 million? But really, especially in this case, the big question is he worth that wage?
Yes.
And yeah, you can definitely ask questions there. And then Semenyo as well, you will probably get him on a lower wage. So yeah, it's a very interesting one. And so I guess like ultimately you get Semenyo for cheaper both ways, like both the fee and the wage. So ultimately you probably get like I don't know, but like over 2 years you can easily get 20 million difference potentially.
Yeah. Well, that's without the knock-on effect as well, right? Like Arsenal are renegotiating a bunch of contracts this summer. They've got Saka to renegotiate, Saliba. These are jobs for Berta coming in. Trying to renegotiate those after it's being reported that you're giving, you know, Iñaki Williams 280, 300,000 a week, something like that. Good luck. Good luck.
Saka's gonna be like, all right, man, it's fine. I'll keep the 250.
Yeah, just like sign over the stadium to me. Okay, I think that brings us to a close for today. Those are the players that we wanted to cover. If there are other guys who you've seen on the transfer merry-go-round who you have alternatives for, then let us know them in the comments. Or if you just disagree with these shouts, then we'd be interested to hear why as well. Neel, where can people find you between this and your next appearance?
Yep, you can go to @Neel on Blue Sky on Twitter. And yeah, you'll basically find myself on both platforms.
Perfect. I highly recommend following Neel. And thank you very much for following us. We really do appreciate it. If you're watching us on YouTube, please do like this video and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed it. Drop us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app, and we will be back next week covering all the action. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.